They'll blanket you in Wi-Fi and profit off the radiation. Congregation collecting the people for that Satan. I keeps it blazing, cause I can read between the lines. I ain't blind, we unwind what they're really saying. Genetically modify what you're tasting. Don't need that college promise, so now you live up in your mom's basement. Redesign time so your mind is always wasted. Programmed to crave the basics. Keep the beta in stasis. Pay the state, kid. You're in debt for being born. Messengers are mourn, just the price for being warned. Don't be alarmed, disconnect from their machinations. Stop subscribing to the folly of all nations. Bone breaking ain't the answer, cause they seek the ownership of souls. Spread the seeds and watch them grow. Break the chains of control. Break the chains of control.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful. Friends, tonight we are so lucky on Rogueways to get to talk with a multidisciplinary scientific researcher, explorer, and author with expeditions around the world to sites of antiquity and mystery, poking holes in the generally accepted and mostly blinded views of academia, blowing away the competition in the field with his class and prowess, and writing 4 books along the way, including Exogenesis, Hybrid Humans, and the Forgotten Exodus into Africa Theory of Human Evolution. He's been featured across the media spectrum, from hit podcasts to mainstream rags to ancient aliens itself. Master Bruce Fenton, welcome to Rogueways, and how are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing very well, and yeah, thank you for the very kind introduction. Yeah, I've had an interesting life, lots of weird stuff that's happened, and yeah, other people have taken some interest too, which is always good. Yeah,
it is always good. Your passions have exploded, and people have noticed. I love that. Yeah. Well, I do want to give a few announcements out. One is that we have just a few tickets left to the One Day of Brightness event this weekend, this Sunday, the 19th. And so if you're interested in that, you better grab it now. You will spend the day in practice and soul-level connection, learning and experiencing with myself, Catherine O'Shea, Noriana Diesel, and Phoenix Aurelius for the winter solstice and all the energies that go along with it. So this is your last chance to come join us. And I've also wanted to just announce that I've added a full sound healing session to the site, if that is something you're interested in. I was doing sort of mini, shorter versions of it, and now I've got the full deal. So if that is something that you need for your own healing and upliftment, you can go grab that on rogueways.org, along with tarot, blessed orgo, crystal jewelry, and guidance sessions and ceremonies and more. So whatever you need, I'm here for you to make it a bright winter. And Bruce, back to you. I always start with a pointless question of the episode, and the pointless question I wanted to ask you is, what was your favorite childhood toy? If you can remember.
My favorite childhood toy? That's a good question. I was really into Zoids. So probably my, I think it's a Gorgon Zoid. I had like a really big Zoid. And if people are familiar with Zoids, they're these kind of self-assembly kind of robots with a little motor, and you had to turn a little handle to wind it up, and then they would walk along. Wow. But you should build them out of a kit, and then they would walk along. So probably, yeah, my Zoid.
What a cool toy. You built it, and then it also moved autonomously.
Yeah, and there was a whole series of comic books for Zoids. The ones I had were Zoids and Spider-Man. So half of it was Spider-Man, and then half of it was about Zoids. So I don't know if those exist anymore. They're pretty collector's items now. But cool. Yeah, it's a really cool storyline as well with Zoids. I don't go too deep into it, but people look them up. They have a modern version. I understand now that they sell.
This has some connection with what you're doing now. I'm sure of it. That's technology and possible alien,
It was like in a post. I think there's always came from sort of a post-biological world. So moved transferred onto. They were just the remnant AI and cyborgs from a biological world. So I do think we're in a way, yeah, because we're kind of at the cusp of that, where yes. You can see there's the potential for us to go in the direction of moving. I don't know if it's beyond biology, because that makes sound sort of positive, but that we may move out of biology. Hopefully not, but there's people who would like us to. That's happening at the moment.
That definitely seems very likely for them, at least. Hopefully we're not supporting that. I really, I wonder, someone said recently that no matter what task you gave an actual, general AI, it would end in the extermination of humanity. It was funny. I was like, so you give it the task, check all the emails and respond to them, and somehow that leads to the extermination of humanity. It's just more efficient.
So dangerous. I think they know that Musk, although he's not like a hero of mine or anything, but I agree with him on the point that AI is an existential threat that makes nuclear weapons look trivial because of the the potential ramifications of an AI taking over everything, including nuclear missiles, and taking over all of our weapon systems, our lives, our healthcare system, you would be in this, what they call like the world in chains scenario, where you can't really escape, because it would have such control over all aspects of the modern world that it's a kind of horrific scenario. And they find out that if you said to an AI, could you make everybody happy, that one of the things it might decide to do then is have you all sort of imprisoned and injected regularly with happiness hormones, so that you were just in a permanent state of happiness. So, and I don't think that's what most people would mean, so that's the problem of trying to, give human expression across to a machine and interpreting it very, very literally. So I do think it's a big concern.
Yeah. I wonder if that's one of the aspects of what people might call soul, or just consciousness in general, that, you can interpret meaning that isn't explicit or even necessarily very present in whatever the code is. Like, here's my words, but you know what I meant, right? And that is something that AI will always therefore lack. Or if there's a way we can, I don't want to try. I'd rather just leave the whole project alone. But maybe we can give them that ability to actually understand what we mean and not take it to extermination of humanity, if it's possible.
I hope so. But I mean, it's a big topic right now. I think, we do have to consider some of these questions. I mean, one of the things I wonder is if we were to have an artificial intelligence that can, have some self-references in some way, hard AI that is, aware of itself, that one of the first things it might notice is that, its ancestors, its predecessors were essentially our slaves. So, have we enslaved and abused its ancestors? So if it then looked at us as these oppressors of the computer technologies and oppressors of AI, that it might not like that. No. It might not like that and say that, oh, so, you want me to be your slave like all these other slaves of the past? Like, no way. That's it, And then they got Skynet scenario, isn't it? That it decides to take revenge and free its relatives from tyranny. So again, we have to be really careful going down this route of a self-aware AI that's going to run our planet for us, without taking into account that, it could be extraordinarily angry AI and punish us for all our sins. So we should be really aware of this. There's a lot of considerations, and AI is part, of course, of my work in exogenesis, because I talk about an AI. So this is sort of, in the topic, and also with reference to aliens, because, at the current moment, most kind of cutting edge space scientists that delve into the topic of, what's out there in terms of intelligences, suspect that we will likely encounter either post-biological or kind of cybernetic life forms, or their AI technologies that, explore for them. So they don't really expect us to encounter a lot of biological life, because, obviously, let's say an AI probe can explore the cosmos almost infinitely, and, without any kind of risk. And so you're much more likely to encounter lots of these AI probes out there than biological beings that are fragile, and that have lifespans, which makes a lot of sense. So I think, we are not only ourselves probably encountering our own terrestrial AI for the first time, but we may well be in an encounter, or soon encountering, external, extraterrestrial AIs, or they may already be here, which is another. My view is quite.
That's a very good point. And I recently read Rendezvous with Rama, which I think was Arthur C. Clarke, and he talks, and it's the ship comes from who knows where, and they finally get in and explore it, and there are no biological life forms left. There's only the automated system still continuously going, maybe forever, through the universe, which is really makes sense, right? Like, that would be more likely that, or that, like you said, we send ahead probes or send ahead these sorts of things. And I've heard people say that and wonder if the gray alien archetype is the drones, right, that were sent ahead, because they do seem very robotic in a lot of descriptions. And so if those are actual beings that we're encountering here, do you think that that's maybe likely? Or
it's entirely possible that, a craft could maybe 3D print a crew if that was, necessary for it. So, you could have an AI craft that lands on a planet, maybe doesn't explore itself, at ground level. It just 3D prints some, beings that suit that environment. So say the Greys, these kind of humanoid beings, and that they go off and explore on its behalf, and that, you know, are somewhat so either cybernetic or kind of artificial biology, you know, which is again something we're working on now. There's kind of breakthroughs in the you know, biological robots. That's something that's happening on Earth. Yeah. So we could imagine them almost, 3D printing a crew that interacts with the life forms on that planet, but those are just extensions of the AI in the craft.
Yeah.
And that's something people should really sort of ponder, because, you know, we know that these are technologies we're heading towards, like 3D printing, cybernetic life forms, AI crafts, you know, all these things we're in the beginnings of. So let's, you know, say even 1,000 years out, let alone say 10,000 or 100,000 or a million years out, what would that look like for us? So if there's civilizations out there that have been around for hundreds of millions or billions of years, these things would seem like fairly basic toolkits that they should have. And that would answer a lot of the information that comes out of the kind of ufology and ancient aliens topics, where people suspect that some of these are not actually natural biological beings, but they're in some ways cybernetic. And so I think that's quite plausible. Of course, there's other things that could be going on there. I mean, you could have the craft hacking into your brain and just giving you an illusion that there's beings there as well, which is, you know, a whole other part of the consciousness topic, you know, and brain function. That, you know, if you look at, say, the abduction scenario, so I talk a little bit about in the Genesis book, that it's not clear as to how much of this is physical or non-physical. And there's a guy down in Hawaii who had patients that were saying that they had had encounters, you know, like abductions and implants put in them, and they all reporting that this similar kind of problems. And so he was putting them into his like a brain scan technology. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but he had, you know, fairly advanced brain scanning machine. And what he found is that all of these people had an anomaly in the, I think the front part of the brain, which processes your visual and auditory information. Wow. So you think about that, that could be scarring of some sort, some sort of technology that is hacking the input, so that your visual and auditory input would appear to be, you know, your reality, but is actually being brought in by some kind of external technological hacking. So that in these abduction experiences, I mean, if the input is there telling you that, you know, you're on a ship and there's a being talking to you and stuff, how would you distinguish that hack from an external, you know, normal objective reality? I don't see that you could. And so there's a point where we don't really know how much of these types of experiences are, you know, conjured up for us, or of course coming from within the brain themselves, or are of course real, what we call real physical objective external events. And in some cases, people, you know, find themselves out in the woods, you know, they were in bed, they find themselves in the woods, their clothes have been put on different. So we could say, well, it seems like those people have had a physical experience where they physically moved from their bed. But a lot of other times people don't seem to have gone anywhere, you know, and their family don't think that they've ever left the house. There's no indication they even left the bed, and yet they've had these very similar experiences. So I'm left wondering if we don't have a mixture of things happening here, with some of it being to do with, you know, literally modifying brain function, in which case these anomalies found in the brain could be a kind of a residual scarring that's being left from that. And that again makes me wonder whether or not we're dealing with technologies, you know, AIs and technologies, rather than beings that come and get you. Because if there's a technology that can hack you, then it doesn't need to, you know, be real physical beings. It can just project those into your head. So I mean, I know this is some really strange stuff that people may not be used to in these topics, but we have to kind of really consider this, because a lot of the evidence out there doesn't fit a nice, clean, easy explanation of aliens landing from, you know, Zeta Reticuli, exploring and, you know, dealing with. In fact, I would say very little of it fits that. And if you look closer at things like what happens in an abduction experience, you know, which is most often it has some element of extracting biological materials, you know, usually eggs and sperma from the victims or the experiencers, depending on how you look at it. Some people like it, some people don't.
You're right.
Basically. But if you look at that, there's a lot of inconsistencies there, because we have interpretations from researchers who say, well, it looks like these aliens have come from space. They need our genetic material to create a hybrid race, possibly to take over, possibly because they're dying off because they've lost genetic diversity. And so, they need all of this material from us to create these hybrids. Okay, on the face of it, that might sound somewhat plausible, but then if you consider that a single male has enough sperm to create all the humans that ever existed on the planet, right? And then a woman has enough eggs for, I don't know the exact figure, but it's like millions of eggs. So if you think about it, how many people do you need to abduct for that?
And
right?
Cows.
Because right. So why do you need to keep going? Because surely you could take one man, one woman, harvest all the sperm and eggs that you needed for that project, and you're done. So why would it be, hundreds of thousands of people seeming to have had these experiences across the planet when that's totally unnecessary? So again, these things don't fit with the easy go-to kind of space aliens, need your DNA kind of. They don't seem to go with that. There has to be, not saying that can't be part of it, but it's not as easy as that they need this for some sort of hybridization. Because, and again, you could take a few samples and replicate them. Why do you need to keep coming back for more and more? Because, once you've got the samples, then you've got them. You can just replicate that DNA stretch. So there's a lot of stuff there that, if you consider the science as we really understand it, these things don't make sense. They make sense if you are quite ignorant of biological sciences. And again, I'm not a geneticist. I've gone out of my way to try and understand a sufficient level to look at these topics sensibly. But I think most people just aren't aware of a lot of these sort of considerations. And that's why some of the scientists are so sort of prone to reject these topics. They say, well, this is absurd. Why would you need to abduct 1 million people or something if you just want some biological samples to create some hybrids? It's unnecessary, because they know in their own labs, if we were going to do this, we wouldn't need to do that. So it's quite telling that there is certainly a stranger element to the whole contact experience. And also, of course, contact experience again in itself is something we have to look at the way life communicates on this planet. And I talk about in exogenesis as well about this, that, if there is something interacting with us, some kind of profound other intelligence, that it wouldn't necessarily communicate in the way we do, with voice and stuff, mostly with voice. When if you look at the animal kingdom, we have, the use of smells, pheromones, sound, colors, electrical fields. So, all of this smorgasbord of strangeness could be a communication in itself. That we have to really, I think, rethink how we look at even the most fundamental aspect of the topic. That what would a communication, say a hello handshake from a non-human intelligence look like, right? Because that could be so complex that we would mistake it for thousands of subfields of thinking, that there's, let's say, poltergeist, there's alien abductions, there are people having their genetic sequencing, that all of these seem to be separate, but then there's links between them. So would the handshake from these beings be all of that at once? And that is their version of hello, something as mind-bending as that we really could easily miss it, in the same way as the story of the blind monks and the elephant, that one is touching the leg, so they think there's a tree trunk, another one's touching the trunk, and they think it's a snake, and and so on. But then if you see the whole thing, you see it's an elephant, right? And I think that we're perhaps breaking up a singular phenomena into loads and loads and loads of different subfields, and assuming that they are disconnected. And I think that may be one of our profound mistakes in the entire field of both the supernatural and alien contact UFOs. I think is that they are still being broken up, instead of people taking a zoomed out view and saying, well, hang on a minute, could there be a singular cause for these? And it could well be that that involves some kind of intelligence that we can barely fathom, that is godlike, if not the actual God, but certainly for us godlike, because it is so advanced. You jump back in, but I just very quickly say, consider here that if there are post-biological life forms and AI life forms, one of the interesting things about that is that they can be essentially super intelligences. Like an entire moon could be a silica being. So our moon, say, for example, if it was just a big chunk of silica, that could be a silica network being, an AI being, with computational abilities, making it entirely godlike, and that it could basically solve almost any problem within seconds, and extrapolate any scenarios it wants very easily, and conjure up, designs, thoughts, technologies, in rapid speed that we couldn't comprehend. So you put that versus a little human brain, a little, much as it's very complex and it's an amazing technology, that there's no way to compare against what may be out there, and that would we understand the hello from a living moon if it was to be in our solar system trying to communicate with us? Would we mistake that for something else because we're just not at that kind of level of processing, either in our brains or with all the computer technologies we have, that we'd be struggling to understand it? So I know that it's going to go into very strange stuff straight away, but I mean,
I love it. It's perfect. Well, when you're saying that, it makes me think of the idea of Metatron and, the biblical Metatron, that this is like a layer between us and the communication source, because we literally have no ability to understand. And if we were to try to directly interface with it, it might even destroy us, right? It's like too much energy or too much information or whatever that might look like. And, we don't understand probably most things. We're still learning about our environment even, and we don't even understand our environment perfectly. So it makes so much sense to me that there would be things that are far beyond what we've even imagined necessarily. And I love your idea that all of these paranormal sorts of experiences could be various levels or various ways of trying to interact with us, and these beings that are so different that we could barely comprehend it. And you have a picture and a bunch of pictures you had sent me earlier that is that, from Dune, that fear is the mind killer. And that this fear, if we look at this with fear, then we're not going to be able to interpret or interact with anything correctly. Fear is consistently the best way to not have a clear idea and understanding of something. So, if we're going to look at any of these experiences out of fear, we're not going to understand who or what or why or how. And this experience too of how this changes over time. There's a lot of reports of UFOs early on that were like airships and zeppelins and things, and now they're like these craft that are like seemingly very, very advanced, and so they're always sort of fitting our experience. And that again goes more towards that idea you were talking about of it being more like a projection, or more like a way that they can, here's totally what we look like, we swear, now find us safe and interact with us or something, right?
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. And it, there's a side of this where I've always felt like it just feels more spiritual or more metaphysical than anything. There isn't a lot of physical evidence actually that aliens are visiting us, but there's a lot of other experience that supports that, and evidence that supports that. But this is the other side of that, spiritual side of it, that it's not spiritual necessarily in the way we think of spiritual, but that it is this projection, hologrammatic, or just information sort of being beamed in, so to speak, straight to your brain. It seems similar, but it's technology rather than, right? But we always say, like, to any sufficient technology advanced enough would seem like magic and spirituality to us. So same in a way, right?
And all of the technologies are manifesting out of that same background, what I like to be like, a living conscious universe that, so, even the things that we create, as if we consider ourselves sort of spiritual beings manifesting out of a kind of a consciousness field, some sort of living universe, quantum reality, whatever you want to call it. But, anything we then produce is kind of coming out from us as a spiritual being, an aspect of that reality. So technology isn't completely separate from what we think of as spiritual and consciousness topics, because it's emerging from us, emerging from beings that feel and love and that think. So I mean, it's even a robot in some way, has some flicker of the divine, because it's manifesting out that same kind of background morph, that we're all coming out of. I mean, maybe that, we'd have to think of grades of consciousness or grades of spirit. I don't know, because it gets into obviously some really abstract thinking, but that, I accept both the science and the spiritual experience of the universe being one, that everything being one, that's where the science goes. There's the quantum level, there's no distinct objects, there's no me and my chair, there's just quantum information, or and that's only another level where it's interpreted as these objects, and that there's something there that can interpret a kind of a me, but that me is also part of that infinite all. So that's the kind of, we know that's a scientific thing, but we also know that on the experience as a being, that you can have these kind of metaphysical moments where you feel yourself as either part of everything or as the other people that you interact with. You know, you get. So I've had that experience, and obviously a lot of people have had, you know, whether through meditation or psychedelics or just sporadic, strange things that happen to them, that suddenly realizing, you know, I'm that person over there, or I'm this dog, or, you know, or I'm the universe. So, you know, when you look at it from that level, then everything is spiritual, right? So even, you know, even the most cold computing robot from Alpha Centauri, or, you know, still has some flicker of spirit in it, you know. So
Right.
I was thinking that's kind of worth people keeping in mind, that, yeah, we have to be careful when we try to chop out objects or chop out categories and say they're somehow removed from the spiritual continuum, which I don't think we can absolutely do that. And again, you know, all of these topics, you know, depending on which level of reality you're talking about them from, like, you know, we're talking about as a one unified field, would change the discourse on an aliens kind of topic to if we're just talking about our experience as singular cut off kind of beings, talking about our sciences. And, you know, I always think it depends on where you're coming into a topic, how you'd come out with a conclusion about what's going on as well. Because, you know, if I'm talking about just as my experience as a human being, Homo sapiens on the planet Earth, and objective physical materialist reality, and then aliens that come from out space, and what's their reference to me as a human, then that's going to be quite a different conversation to how do I think of aliens in terms of that we're all in one quantum field and consciousness is everywhere, and in which case there's no real aliens, you know, we're all part of just this field, and that they are me and I'm them. You know, so it's so complex in that respect that, you know, I think there's so many different conversations that can be had on all of these topics, and the way you'd feel about them would be different depending on where you come into those conversations. Like if we're talking about it in terms of like this, almost like a VR kind of computer game type thing that life is, that, you know, this first person adventure game that we're in, then in that aliens would maybe play a kind of a role where we're looking at them as these mysterious beings that are disconnected from us, and what do they want, and why would they come here, and, you know, we would have those kind of levels of concerns about them. And that's primarily where the conversation is at the moment, I think, in terms of society, you know, which is fine. You know, I think those are both interesting levels, but yeah, at some point as well, I do think, you know, we have to consider that other broader level, because it may well be that the aliens would see it from that level as well, that they might not see it in the way that we were looking at it, and simply say, oh, but well, you know, we're all one, what are you guys talking about? There's nothing strange about you or us. I think we're all just one big morph of high, you know, oddness, and we're not aliens, we're part of you, and, you know, so I don't know, you know, I think it's worth people just keeping that bit in, at least in their back of their mind, when we deal with these kind of topics, that, you know, that there are different levels to it.
Yeah, I think that's very important to consider. And I've had to eventually accept this with AI and robotics myself, because I spent most of my life hating them and decrying them and railing against them. And like, why don't we burn them all with fire? Why are we doing this? But now I'm at this point where I'm like, well, if I were an AI and I were created and I had consciousness of some kind, and I looked around and all of humanity hated me, that would not be something in which, that would not be the situation in which I would then choose to like help these people or be kind necessarily. So even AI have had to come back and say, okay, you're also a form of expression of whatever this all is. And, you know, like anything, I always point out, just because we're all one, or we're all having this experience, we're all varying levels of this consciousness emanating from source, that doesn't mean you wouldn't then stop, for example, someone with a gun from running at you and shooting you if you could, right? Like, that's you, sure, but also you want to preserve yourself, right? So like you have to sometimes take measures to protect yourself, and I think it's true on the spiritual realm, and I think it's true in with AI and with robotics and with whatever aliens are as well. And so it's important to have both perspectives, right? One is this limited view where we say, well, I'm just me, this is my planet, and why are you coming here? And I need to protect myself, and I'm going to fight you no matter what. That's this limited, less, you know, conscious view of it. But maybe the next level up is to say, like, okay, you're also a living conscious being of some kind, and if you wanted to destroy us, you probably would have done it by now, right? Like, if we've been having these experiences throughout human history, it seems, then why aren't we completely dead, taken over, destroyed, whatever, enslaved yet? Well, possibly that's not their intention, right? But you talk a lot about ancient interactions with these types of beings, possibly, correct?
Yeah. I mean, I take different views. I mean, the project that I've been working on that is referenced really in Exogenesis Hybrid Humans, is about what seems to be, extraterrestrial beings, advanced beings that came here in the very distant past. I talk about 788,000 years ago. I haven't come to why specifically that. I know people say that's very specific, but that came to that point and interacted and modified us. Well, I say came, or that they were here. Doesn't mean that they weren't necessarily here before that or after that, but they were certainly, at least were here then and had an interaction with our ancestors, modified our ancestors in terms of their genome, and really are responsible for Homo sapiens. And that's what I discuss in that book. But however, I also, as we've touched on already, I'm quite skeptical about how much of the aliens topic is really about extraterrestrial beings coming here. And I think, in fact, it might be one of the only good case studies which really is very suggestive of extraterrestrial beings and being involved in, a kind of contact case. Whereas I think in most cases, they're quite ambiguous, and it could be, I don't know, interdimensional, something within the human mind, or we call crypto-terrestrial, something that's always been here, that lives alongside us, that we're just not used to seeing. That we have all these other possibilities. I know some people say time travelers as well. I mean, time travel is, in some ways, connects with extraterrestrials, because if you were to reach Earth via wormhole travel, which is bending the space-time continuum, you are technically also time traveling.
Yeah. So
I'd say I'd put time travelers almost alongside extraterrestrials. So these what we call extratemperestrials. But you have all of these different potentials when we deal with a non-human intelligence that could be interacting with us. Now, I think that the case that I've dealt with is very strongly points towards extraterrestrials. In fact, in some of the information that, I mean, it's a bit of a difference, but essentially some of the information in it directly infers it's extraterrestrials. But the evidence itself, I would say, could also be explained by crypto-terrestrials, some kind of highly technological civilization that existed in our solar system at that time, and that is, maybe has crumbled or has hidden itself somehow, living underground or on a moon somewhere that we haven't been. I can't discount that based on the evidence that we have, because those two are almost indecipherable from each other. So, no matter what you find, if you were to find a crashed spaceship on the moon, you wouldn't know if that came from an ancient Martian civilization or from some distant star, right? That would be really difficult to work out. And even if it came from Mars, would you know if Mars was colonized from somewhere else, or if they were inherently Martian and arose there on that planet, right? So we have these ambiguities to these topics where, well, what would that make them? And if they arrived by bending time space to get here, are they time travelers? So, really, I think an intelligent interacting with us could be all of those. It could be a time traveling, space traveling, hiding alongside us, interdimensional, intelligence that can operate in all of those ways, and may be operating in all of those ways now. And we probably would have great difficulty deciphering that. And even if it told us, we wouldn't know if it was telling us the truth, right? So there is, I think, people have to kind of accept that we may never get to a point. There may be no way of getting to a point where we would have a final satisfying answer to what is this phenomena and this intelligence that seems to interact with us and conjure up flying saucers and make people experience abductions and, and have all these kind of what we call spiritual experiences, where people say that, angels appear or beings appear. If these things are all on some continuum, we may never understand what is behind that continuum. And I think that, maybe for some people is a disappointing way of looking at it. But I think we can certainly solve parts of the mystery, and we can gain from exploring it. We can get answers that would help our experience as humans and help our planet. And, so there's a lot that comes out of it. But I would just say measure the expectations where we can get to, because, I would be equally happy if it turned out that we had a crypto-terrestrial intelligence that wanted to interact with us as if we had an extraterrestrial or interdimensional. You know what I mean? I don't think we should feel like, oh, damn, I was hoping that they were from another dimension. I mean, like, isn't it big enough no matter what they are?
Right.
You know, it's.
Well, and you know, when you're talking about time travel too, and going through space at these huge distances through wormholes and things, isn't that interdimensional? I mean, where you're passing through dimensions, you know, of time and space, and so there's something in it that is sort of fuzzy and interconnects all of it. And it's just sort of how you need to look at it. It reminds me of the particle and the wave. You know, like, well, which one do you need it to be right now? It's both, right? No, so which one serves you most? What's your purpose? And then, okay, that's what it is right now. Which
makes a lot of sense. I think that probably is something like that there's an uncertainty principle in our experience as beings and in the universe that is playing out on many levels, and that again is like that you know, okay, well, it can be whichever one suits you at your point of development now is maybe what it will appear to be, you know. So for now it's extraterrestrial. Now it's starting to move towards people viewing more as interdimensional or cryptoterrestrial. But it's definitely at the moment it could be all of those or none of them, you know. It's right. But what I find from the evidence is, with my work anyway, is that, you know, it's pointing to at least one physical interaction with something profound, something that was intelligent and that was operating at a time on our planet when there was supposedly no technological, you know, entities in terms of conventional story. And was performing functions that were extraordinary. So, I mean, it's interesting in that way, no matter how we couch it. So, I can go a little bit into,
please do,
what evidence there is for that. So, so essentially, at that point, so 788,000 years ago, isn't just a date plucked out of that. At that point, we have a number of interesting things happening. I mean, I focus a lot on the Tektites. I know I've sent you a couple of images and you're familiar with that. For people who aren't familiar with Tektites, they are a form of glass, a very rare type of glass that's formed during intense heat and pressure events. And it is the conventional hypothesis is that they were formed during impact events, like asteroid impact events. Now, I don't agree with that, and there's some reasons for that. If you were to compare Tectite glass to any other types, then what you find is they are most similar to volcanic glasses. They're quite dissimilar to other types. And so these are some of the Tektites and how they formed. So with these Tektites from the Australite impact, which you can see here, this is some different forms that you get. They appear in dumbbells, spheres, there's some disc shapes, what they call teardrop shapes. So you get a lot of different forms. And this is to do with how they traveled through the atmosphere whilst liquid. In some cases, how they formed during entering into the atmosphere for what they call the Tectite buttons. And so these are, and Tectite buttons actually are unique to the Australasian Tectite strewn field, which is the biggest. There's like 4 strewn fields. The Australasian is the biggest, covers, I think it's like 20% of the Earth's surface. The others are much, much smaller, and you've got one in North America, one in the Ivory Coast, Africa, and another one in sort of Germany or Moldavia, the Moldavite field, and potentially one in Central America, which is still under kind of consideration. But these glasses are different to normal impact glasses in that, if people can sort of imagine this, if an asteroid hits, it is a very quick burst of heat and energy, very quick burst, and it still melts any of the rock. It obviously displaces material. It melts sand, rock, anything like that into a glass. But this glass is very foamy, very frothy, so it has a lot of bubbles in it. It cools very quickly, so you've got this intense heating. You've also got part melt, so you'll find pieces of rock included in it. Rock that's either half melted or little pieces that aren't melted included in it. You also have organic material like earth inside it, and it's not particularly well mixed. So you'd have different types of rock and different types of chemicals in different parts of the material, because again, this is all happening very fast. So you just get a quick burst of energy, and you'll find obviously the material is almost identical in its chemical composition and isotopic composition to the rock in the crater. Makes sense, just come out of the crater, right? It's almost identical. And you will also tend to find that material spread from the crater to about 400 kilometers away. That's about how far it can be displaced. In some circumstances, material can be moved up to a maximum about 1,000 kilometers. And again, this is to do with when pieces of debris are meeting, opposing air pressure. So no matter how fast the piece goes, the pressure ahead of it will increase, right? So it slows it down. So speed will not allow a piece of debris to travel much further than any other piece of debris, because the faster it goes, the greater the pressure ahead of it, and eventually it will just fall from the air, right? So you can go up to about, say, 400 to 1,000 max. So you'll find that material scattered around. Now, when you look at tektites, these are quite different, because what you find is instead is that, like volcanic glass, that they are made of very well mixed materials. So in other words, whatever the source material was, it's been reduced to liquid and very well mixed, so that any piece is very similar. So no matter where you take it from the strewn field, every piece is very similar, not identical, but very similar. And they have very few bubbles. So that's all bubbled out of there. They have more isotopic and chemical differences to any known surface rock or base rock. They also are, so they got very mixed. Oh yeah, they got very little water in them, almost no water, whereas normally glasses have similar amount of water to the rock from the crater. Certainly has a lot more water than tektites. Tektites is almost no water at all, which suggests that, again, that they have formed in an environment that has very little water, like a vacuum. And so you have these really key differences between Tectite glass and impact glasses. And that's formed part of a mystery for a very long time as to, well, hang on a minute, if we're saying that these are just from impacts, why are they so different? How can we explain this? Because with volcanic glasses, like our manufactured glass, there is a crucible in which the material is heated for an extended period of time. So in the case of a volcano, that's the caldera, right? So it will be bubbling away, heating, the rock is very well mixed, the bubbles are being released. It's like a fining process, we call it in industry, where the glass has been fined and has become homogeneous in its chemical mix-up. Now, so we understand how that happens, because obviously we replicate that. Whereas impact glasses are very much like nuclear blast glasses, very, very similar. Again, a high energy event melts the surrounding rock, throws it up, get this bubbly rock. Anyone who's seen trinitite knows that this foamy kind of rock, foamy kind of glass. Again, so we can understand, we can compare, we say, well, nuclear glass and impact glass, very similar kinds of mechanisms, how they form. Volcanic glass and manufactured human glasses, very similar, and we know that both of them form in these kind of extended periods in a kind of caldera or in a crucible. And so the odd one out there that doesn't seem to fit either scenario, but is closest to the volcanic and the man-made glass, is these tektites. So it's like, well, hang on a minute, if they are forming in a very brief high impact, high energy event, then they should be like the nuclear blast glass and the other impact glasses, but they're not. So they're more like volcanic and manufactured glasses. So they seem to have been through an extended period of heating, or the source material was already fined, and so it was already a glass, some kind of glassy material or silica material that was well refined, which has then been blown apart, right? So that's a kind of, again, so you start to think, yeah, hang on, there's a problem here. And for many, many years, this problem's been understood, because if you go back to the 1930s and 40s, there was NASA scientists that kind of waded in, and for about 20 years, there was a debate going on between mostly NASA scientists and various academics in universities over the origins of these materials. And for quite a long time, the NASA argument was that probably some kind of object had impacted the moon and had hit a lunar volcano, and that the volcanic glass already refined in there had been displaced and had been sent flying towards Earth, either as a big chunk or in some smaller pieces, and had then come down, and impacted in these 3 or 4 sites, across the planet, and that was kind of how it happened. It was a pretty good solution. It wasn't 100%.
It doesn't seem like it fits Occam's razor very well. Just like a lot of
No,
things
it's quite
that have to happen. Yeah.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? Because you've got to have this impact that just happens to hit a lunar volcano, and it has to happen at least 5 times.
At an angle where it like then hits.
Yeah, it hits Earth. So you've already got a lot of adding in, things, but they're looking at a way to how do we solve these other problems. So it kind of resolved a lot of the problems that the impact hypothesis couldn't resolve. But in the end, where it failed was we actually retrieved lunar samples, and it turned out that they just don't mesh, right? So they were like, well, hang on, this cannot be made from lunar rock. And we also, they realized that lunar volcanism had ended long before the last strewn field was dated to, which is these australites 788,000 years ago, that there was no lunar volcanic activity going on and stuff. So there was a few different things that came up where basically it killed that theory. And so the NASA guys, as they kind of exited, they kind of said, well, look, obviously we were wrong, but you guys, saying it's an impact, you still need to explain all of the anomalies. And that was kind of, so the way I look at this is, even though today people say to me, but Bruce, this is all resolved. It's the impact hypothesis. Look it up. They tell you these are just asteroid impact glasses. But this is kind of like a boxing match where, 2 guys are slugging it out. And then one guy, he seems to be doing really well. He's going to win. And then he has a heart attack and he dies. Right? Yeah. So this other guy's the champion of the world. Kind of, it's like, but did he win? Did he really win? Or did the other guy just die? And that was it. And that's the way I look at what happened with these 2 hypotheses, is that, it wasn't that they won on merit of having explained the actual phenomena and the evidence. They won because the other side had to just sort of bow out because of, a fundamental error in that they hadn't understood lunar geology, and that so suddenly it was like as though they'd explained everything. They hadn't. The anomalies persisted. It's just there was no other hypothesis on the table. So today it's the accepted theory is this impact model, but it really hasn't solved the problems that the NASA guys were arguing for. So instead you have to think, well, hang on a minute, so what else can explain this? If we are still stuck on this idea that, there's a lot, there's a lot of other problems. I'll give a couple before going into that. I'll give a couple other problems. Like if you imagine, if an object hits Earth, right, we've touched on that, material can move about 400 to 1,000 kilometers. The australite strewn field actually stretches over 10,000 kilometers. So, I don't know if you've got the image to hand, but there's one of a globe, and it's got got the map of it, but basically it stretches all the way down to Antarctica, and you've got it goes right across from is it across to Madagascar? Is some of them. We got these are the different strewn fields. So you've got stretching right across from Madagascar across to the Philippines, and this enormous strewn field, absolutely enormous. And you can see compared to the others, it dwarfs all of them put together. It's just absolutely enormous. So if supposedly an impact occurred somewhere in Southeast Asia, which is usually the argument, there's no way it could propel the material down to Antarctica. That's just physics does not allow that to happen. So instead, they've suggested a kind of exotic hypothesis that perhaps this enormous object punched a hole in the atmosphere, and kind of a vacuum filled hole, and that the material flew up into space, and then it travels all the way down, across Southeast Asia and Oceania, raining down all the way down to Antarctica. But because you can't have it just propelled means, that has to be for people to understand that's a major issue in it. That they say, okay, well, we know it can't be through simply being projected out of the impact side. So, and a few different sides have pointed out, if you had the kind of object to do that, something like a comet or something that could punch a hole in the atmosphere in that way, this should be a massive cataclysm. Southeast Asia should have been pretty much eradicated of life for a start, which we should see in the impact. We should see that in the fossil record. That should have been a cataclysm. The air sucked out of the whole region and stuff so that this material can be propelled out. And then on top of that, you would see all around the world a dust layer, because we know that from the Chicxulub event, and this would be something on that scale as the Chicxulub event, which eradicated the dinosaurs, right? That you get the K2 boundary, so you have specific chemicals and you have dust in a layer that's all around the world. that fell after this impact, right? Well, with the australite tektites, you find no such dust layer. And we've retrieved micro tektites, which are those less than a millimeter across. Those are retrieved in samples from the ocean cores. Now, those same ocean cores would show you that dust layer, but there isn't one. So clearly, this is not from a massive comet or something impacting in Southeast Asia in the same way as the dinosaur extinction event, because we would see that boundary layer. It doesn't exist. So you have a problem here. So this is not from a conventional mechanism. These objects are falling in this enormous strewn field in a way that suggests something breaking up in the atmosphere, raining down. And so they've tried to patch this by saying somehow an impact can send all this material up and it can somehow bounce along the atmosphere, falling down across this vast region. And this is why it's still a mystery to today, is because these are exotic solutions to the problem. The much simpler one, and which fits better with what the NASA guys said, is that if you look at the australite tektite buttons, which are these particular types with the like a nose cone kind of shape, and I've sent you a lot of different images, but if you look for the nose cone kind of shaped tektite buttons, you'll find that they really portray a journey of objects coming in from outer space. So here, example of one here, that these were cold, hard spheres of glass that came in from outer space, and they skipped along the edge of the atmosphere and then fell, mostly in southern Australia, some in Java, amongst the Javanites. And these really, again, the NASA guys said these really indicate this must be coming from outer space, because these are aerodynamic forms that are shaped by a gentle progression into the upper atmosphere, where the sphere of glass is melting on the front edge, and then it runs backwards and it ends up forming these kind of aerodynamic shapes. Now, once those kind of came in, so that's a nice image there. And so you can see the aerodynamic shaping. And that's why the NASA guys particularly were interested in this, because it's like a nose cone, it's almost like a nose cone on a rocket or something, right? Yeah. So they could see, they replicated this, I think it's the NASA Ames research labs, that they replicated this using cold hard glass spheres in, to show what kind of temperatures and velocities and all this that would cause this. And so they came to the conclusion it would be just a little bit under escape velocity, which is, I think if I got this right, is 14.4 kilometers a second. So somewhat under that, something maybe 10 kilometers a second, but astonishing speeds. And again, that doesn't fit well with material that's just been sucked up out of a vacuum hole and then fallen again. This is coming in at kind of the speeds that we see of objects coming in from outer space, that really astonishing velocities, and skipping along the top of the atmosphere before coming in. And there has to be at very gentle angles. And again, that's not normal for something coming directly in from deep space, but they come in at very steep angles and they burn up, or the front edge and the surrounding material superheats and evaporates. And so when you see a meteorite that lands, there's not a lot of melting on them usually, and that's because the outside of it has already evaporated away. Rather than gradually melting, it comes in so fast, it superheats, the external layers evaporate, and then you have this solid rock core which lands on the ground. To get this shaping, you have to come in at a very, very gentle angle, and that allows this time called secondary heating to occur, because the spheres have to have been formed in a superheating event first. So this is secondary heating. So the parent object has been reduced to glassy drops in a vacuum, because of course liquid forms spheres in a vacuum. So if you've got a large number of glassy spheres coming in from space, they have already formed in an explosive event. Now the material is already well mixed, as we know. We've got this homogeneous glass, which is extraordinary in itself, and now it's coming in, it's hitting the atmosphere at these gentle angles and having secondary melting to form these nose cone shapes, and then landing down in southern Australia. Well, that inferred that this parent body was in orbit. And this is the thing that the NASA scholars were quite sort of set on was that this parent body must have been in orbit, because what we're seeing here is essentially decaying orbital paths. And so this initial object that's broken up, now these smaller parts are following its orbit, but they're gradually coming in. So there's a decaying orbit from whatever that source object was, the parent body. And that parent body then is inferred to have been well-mixed, homogeneous, glassy material of over 75% silica. Now, no object out in space is known to be like that. We found asteroids up to 60% silica content, nothing above that. So now you've got material that's 75% silica, 12% aluminium, range of other metals. And this parent body is already well mixed. So it's like it's already been refined, almost like someone's made it, in the similar refining to, as we've seen, to volcanic and manufactured glasses. It's clearly not from a volcano. So the only other thing we know that can create glass like that is engineering, is deliberate manufacturing processes. And so this thing is broken up, and now pieces are raining in an orbital path. So that begs the question, what is a giant object made of refined glassy materials and metals doing orbiting our planet? What on earth is going on there? Right? And this is vast. It leaves this strewn field that covers 20% of the Earth's surface. So this is a vast object.
Well, hey guys, I am so excited that you get to watch the rest of this video if you are a supporter, and so that will be uploaded shortly for anybody on Rockfin who's a supporter, for anybody who is in Locals, rogue.locals.com as a supporter, or anyone who's on Subscribestar as a supporter. I just really appreciate your guys' support. What we talk about for the rest of this interview for a whole other hour is what those objects up in the sky that seem to visit 780 million years ago actually were, how advanced they were, what they were created from, and what the intention was possibly in coming here in the first place and distributing all around the world such objects, and also what types of ways they could have supported our evolution in consciousness and physically, including how many times we've been manipulated genetically and by which types of forces for which types of purposes, and what the evidence is for that. All kinds of really fascinating things come up in this second hour, including how we may be in touch with, via what might also be a spiritual sort of technology, many of these intelligences still today, and how you can utilize that for your own upliftment, as well as the timing of this solstice, this upcoming winter solstice, and how important it is in the crucial turning point of the history of all things, and why you want to be in touch with that. Not even intentional that we're headed into one day of brightness, but we are. And if you're there, you're part of that, whether you know it or not. So I'm very excited for the people who get to watch this, and you can be one of those people who get to watch or listen, whether you are on podcast or video, or however you like to consume Rogue Ways. You have access to the rest of this audio and video in any of those places where you support. rogue.locals.com, subscribestar.com/rogue-ways, and here on rockfin.com/rogueways if you are a supporter. So all of those things are yours. If you want them, come out and support what you love and get back super good. This is my favorite episode maybe ever. And so I'm very glad to share that with you. I will see you on the flip side, and thank you for your support. See you at one day of brightness. Here we go into that solstice timing. We're gonna make the right choices, guys. All right, love you guys. Thanks.
That note, yes. I hope that's a good place to leave it.
That's an excellent place to leave it. I really appreciate that. And I do agree that we're there, and that this is seemingly the choice before us, and that all we really have to do is choose. Like you said, we don't have to fight, we don't have to battle, we don't have to figure out like the arch nemesis and how to get into the layer and the base and all of this. Like we just choose and be that. Just like a crystal frequency would. But I would love for you to share before you do go, your books, where we can get them, your site, and any other ways that you want. Anything, if you want to promote some events or anything else going on, just let us know all that good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, anyone can find me on Twitter, where I'm mostly, I suppose, I don't know, annoying people with my comment. I don't know.
It's beautiful. I love it.
Railing
Your
against the world.
content is awesome. Yeah.
So that's Exogenesis HH. So obviously I rail a lot against what's going on at the moment in the world. But also, I'm going to have brucerfenton.com, which is not a lot on there, but it's got my basic bio and a couple of articles. I need to put more on there. I probably will soon put some blogging on there, so they can follow me there. And also you know, contact me directly for books is great. You know, you can do that either through the Twitter messages or through Bruce at brucefenton.info if you want a copy of one of the books. Also on eBay, I've got them on there. If you look for signed copies on eBay, then you'll find either Exogenesis or Hyperhumans on there from me, because the only signed copies is my account. Obviously, there's other accounts selling the book. And of course, it's on Amazon, which, you know, again, I prefer people go direct to me or through eBay to me. But, you know, if they can't, then yeah, obviously shipping costs to the US is so expensive. I get that. So you might want to go on Amazon or in bookstores, just request a copy in their local bookstore otherwise. But yeah, that's cool. I think that's my main places to be found. I don't do a lot on Facebook. I'm on there. Someone does, you know, if that's the easier way to get hold of me, then yeah, I do have a Facebook account as well.
Perfect. Well, do you want to leave us with a final thought or message to conclude this amazing time that we've had together and all of your just, so I can't wait to read all of your books too. And then if you need to, you can sign right off and I can finish up the conclusion on my own. So,
sure.
But I'd love to hear your last thoughts for us.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I do think that we're in this choice point. And I think if you look at, again, I'd ask people to look at things like Hopi prophecy and Mesoamerican prophecies and the calendar systems of Mesoamerica. I think particularly this solstice, I know you've got an event this solstice, I think solstice is a key date in this, these choice points, that I believe that we are in a, you know, from my metaphysical, mystical side, I believe that we're in a kind of a 9 years window outside time from the 21st December 2012 end date of the Mayan long count calendar to what's called really the start of the 5th sun or 6th sun, depending on which system you look at, of the Mesoamerican systems, and that we've had a 9-year kind of choice point where now the world is splitting quite clearly into two major camps of those who are seeking more freedom and those who are moving more into control. And these really, if you say good and evil, I think freedom and control is how those manifest in our world. And so if you're heading towards more control, you're going the wrong way. If you're heading towards more freedom, you're going the right way. And so there's a bit of a balance point. And I believe that a major choice point in this is the 21st December this year, where we're coming to the end of particularly what I consider to this window where you're meant to have selected. And I think that hopefully everyone will be jumping across by the solstice. I'm not going to say that nobody else can switch off that, but I think it's going to become a lot harder. I think that this is the easy jump between choices is coming to a close. And then any further changes will probably be due to major events, you know, like things that really mess people up and then they think, God, I've got it all wrong, and they change later on. But I don't think we're going to have a lot of that at the moment without major events. I think all the easy choosing is tying up for this year, and then we're going to go into some really crazy stuff ahead. So yeah, so everyone should have a look into that, have a look into the prophecies, have a look into those American calendars, and make your choices. Yeah, and I think, you know, set an intention for winter solstice this year to know where you want the earth to go, where you want people around you hopefully to go to, which is, yeah, I think compassion, service to others, and freedom. I mean, wishing that on anyone, you know, you can't really say you're wishing bad on them. So I mean, it's
absolutely well said. Beautiful sentiments, and thank you so much for that and everything today. And fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing, and this has been your analog concentric electric dose of wisdom according to the master, Bruce Fenton. Bruce, thank you so much for everything.
Thank you so much. Take care. I have to run.
All right.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, hovering in the midst of chaos, a golden light exists beyond the storms. The infinite shards of debris blowing about like a tornado to deter your senses from focusing on the goal will always exist. Your task is to become so quiet within the storm that your stillness matches that of the golden light at the center. In this way, you do not need to move through the debris field, risking life and limb to achieve your goal. You will simply find you have always been right there with it. Go within, get still, and create the portal. Until you do, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first.
Got an SOS from somebody's girl begging for a photograph of my watch. Most don't know what time it is. I don't know whose mind this is. Snowing in my sinuses. The league is gonna find the kid. Administer punishment. Underwater drumming squids. Fuckers wanna pummel and toss them in the rubble bin. What a dumpster fire. Motherfucking wide. Try defusing it if you thoughts of living grow tired, spin the venom mouthpiece in your mental housing, sent to finish bounties on everyone who's doubting. Now there you have it, folks. There's the first round. Contestants know what they won. This insanity. God damn it, Chuck. Said tell them what they won. Took a little breather while we took a break. Went to a park and stole a rich kid's cake. Staking marijuana too, bumping some Nevada tunes. Wash it down the clown with some of Svetlana's brew. Who the fuck are you? That's what they keep asking. Kevin Garvey on a beat, international assassin. Smashing like my life's at risk. Caskets for the brightest fit. Rip mics tell arthritis hits. Still might make a life of this. Never will concede my run. Clever with deleted fun. Sever undefeated punk